Nathan had prophesied that in David's life there would be strife, there would be adversity in his family. So for the last 5 weeks, we've seen all the adversity David faced in his own home with his children, with Absalom, and we saw last week where David had defeated Absalom, that David had defeated Absalom, and he's regaining his kingdom. But it's not going to be actually as easy as you think. As you read more about Absalom's rebellion, you realize, Absalom had probably a lot of the Israelites on his side. He had a large portion. A few weeks ago, I made the remark that, David could have stayed there. Scholars say he could have stayed in Jerusalem and defended his kingship. But at that time, though, Jerusalem was a fortified city, and there'd been so much damage to it over time that David chose to leave, and basically he fled the city and ended up winning in the end. But the reason David won, even though Absalom probably had more forces, is that David was God's chosen, and Absalom was not. So we see that David was victorious in the forest there. Absalom was killed, and this is what we're going to pick up here in chapter 19 as David tries to restore the kingdom. But we also start to see here too where the divisions are so deep among the Israelites, and they really never recover from this. And also too, we'll see some more of the mistakes that David seems to continue to make here. So we'll pick that up here in just a second, and Brian's going to come here and read in just a moment. But first of all, how about our sick? Who do we have to mention on the sick list? Hey, Delford, is he home or is he? Okay. That's okay. That's good. Anyone else?
How's Miss Frankie doing?
Miss Frankie's supposed to be here. Libby's bringing her.
Libby.
Eva wasn't able to get out.
And also,
Mark, I know everybody's sick, but I just like to say, we try to recognize our young people a lot, but unfortunately we may not recognize them enough as individuals. And I worked up here at the food thing the other day, and I don't get to work every time, but I was here. I mean, the ladies, some of them here all the time, they were like dogs. But we had a couple of young men that we absolutely could not have made it without. Those boxes were really heavy. We were unloading boxes, loading them up again. It was just a big mess. Wyatt Siegfried and Drew Gross helped more than anybody that's ever helped us at all. I mean, and I had a lady at the grocery store say, I don't know who those little young men were, but they were the nicest young men. And their parents are here this morning. I think they ought to hear that. Now, Julie was here, but they were absolutely spectacular. And Drew's really young. I don't know how old.
9.
He's 9. But they were the kindest little fellows you ever said. That we wanted them to lift those boxes into the cars and stuff. And they were directing the traffic and opening the doors, and they would politely say, do you have one family or two? But they were the nicest, most helpful. That Wyatt's strong as an ox. He is. And Drew and I got a little fed up with the green beans, but other than that, everybody went very well.
it's true. I thought you were coming old, but you're coming little.
He's strong though. He'll wear it.
Anybody else? And also too, Al, he ended up this morning to go to Jamaica. He and Allison are on the Jamaica mission trip. That's where they're at this week, so remember them. Anybody else?
Tom Taylor's oldest daughter passed away. Nancy Taylor Stewart.
Yeah, Nancy Taylor, Tom, I saw that in the paper. Tom's daughter passed away this past week from cancer. She was 62, 63. Yeah. Anyway, you remember that family also.
Father, we thank you for all the things that you bless us with. Thank you for all the things that we take for granted. Thank you for all your beautiful creations and for allowing us to see them. Thank you for giving us all another day to come here and to worship you and to learn from your word. Father, thank you for all of our friends and family, especially our church family here at Scottsville. Father, thank you for allowing your Son to die on that cross for our sins. Thank you for loving each and every one of us that much. Thank you for offering us all a home in heaven with you. Father, please forgive us our sins, and please help us to be what you want us to be. Please help us to be good examples to everyone around us. Father, please be with all those that are sick. You know everyone's needs. Please help us to learn from your word today and to apply it to our lives. We love you and we thank you. In Jesus' name, amen. Now, 2 Samuel 19, 9 through 30. Now all the people were in a dispute throughout all the tribes of Israel, saying, "The king saved us from the hand of our enemies. He delivered us from the hand of the Philistines, and now he has fled from the land because of Absalom. Now Absalom, whom we have anointed over us, has died in battle. Now therefore, why do you say nothing about bringing back the king?" So David sent to Zadok and Abiathar the priest, saying, "Speak to the elders of Judah, saying, why are you not the last to bring the king back to his house? Since the words of all Israel have come to the king to his very house. You are my brethren, you are my bone and my flesh. Why then are you the last to bring back the king? And say to Amasa, are you not my bone and my flesh? God, do so to me, and more also. If you are not commander of the army before me continually in place of Joab." So he swayed the hearts of all the men of Judah, just as the heart of one man, so that they sent his word to the king, "Return to you and all your servants." Then the king returned and came to the Jordan, and Judah came to Gilgal to go to meet the king, to escort the king across the Jordan. And Shimei, the son of Gera, a Benjaminite, who was from Bahurim, hurried and came down with the men of Judah to meet King David. There were 1,000 men of Benjamin with him, and Ziba, the servant of the house of Saul, and his 15 sons, and his 20 servants with him. And they went over the Jordan before the king. Then a ferry boat went across to carry over the king's household, and to do what he thought good. And Shimei, the son of Gera, fell down before the king when he had crossed the Jordan. Then he said to the king, "Do not let my impute iniquity to me, or remember what wrong your servant did on the day that my lord the king left Jerusalem, that the king should take it to heart. For I, your servant, know that I have sinned. Therefore, here I am, the first to come today of all the house of Joseph to go down to meet my lord the king." But Abishai, the son of Zeruiah, answered and said, "Shall not Shimei be put to death for this, because he cursed the Lord's anointed?" And David said, "What have I to do with you, you sons of Zeruiah, that you should be adversaries to me today? Shall any man be put to death today in Israel? For I do not know that today I am king over Israel." Therefore the king said to Shimei, "You shall not die." And the king swore to him. Now Bathsheba Mephibosheth, the son of Saul, came down to meet the king, and he had not cared for his feet, nor trimmed his mustache, nor washed his clothes from the day the king departed until the day he returned in peace. So it was, when he had come to Jerusalem to meet the king, that the king said to him, "Why do you not go with me, Mephibosheth?" And he answered, "My lord, O king, my servant deceived me. For your servant said, I will saddle a donkey for myself, that I may ride on it and go to the king, because your servant is lame. And he has slandered your servant to my lord the king. But my lord the king is like an angel of God. Therefore do what is good in your eyes. For all my father's house were but dead men before my lord the king. Yet you set your servant among those who eat at your own table. Therefore what right have I still to cry out any more to the king?" So the king said to him, "Why do you speak any more of your matters? I have said, you and Ziba divide the land." Then Mephibosheth said to the king, "Rather let him take it all, inasmuch as my lord the king has come back in peace to his own house."
Thanks, Brian. Now, again, we see here that, of course, the title of the lesson is David returns to Jerusalem. And you would have thought that, after the battle there, that it would have been an easy task for him to just go right back into Jerusalem and regain his kingship. Again, it's not that easy. We see here what happens is the Israelites come together and they're like, hey, we have no king. We had anointed Absalom as our king, and he's dead. And then they start thinking back, well, maybe David's not such a bad choice after all, because, he had delivered them from the Philistines. He had been a great warrior. David had done a lot of great things for the Israelites, so they decided that, and when I say, I should say Israel, they had decided to bring him back. When we're saying Israel, there's two different factions here starting to play out here. You got the Israel, the divided kingdom is starting to come into existence here, where you've got the northern 10 tribes and the two southern tribes, which would be Judah and Benjamin. So the northern kingdom, or the 10 tribes, decide that David would be the good choice there to become king, and they're trying to sway the men of Judah to bring the king back also. So we see that in the end, of course, David does come back and regain his kingship, not with a lot of difficulties. And again, this all goes back to what we talked about a while ago, all the sins, all the things that continue to happen, all the things that continue to happen after the sin that David had committed with Bathsheba. And, we saw it in his household, and now again we're starting to see it in the Israelite nation. So anybody has any comments, again, please feel free to speak up during our lesson today, okay? Let's go ahead and get here started with the questions here. Question number 1 says, what river did David and his household need to cross in order to come back to Jerusalem? Jordan, yeah. And why had they crossed over the Jordan in the first place? Which, yeah. But I'm sorry, but I guess the question would be better. Why did David leave and go across the Jordan in the first place? When he was fleeing from Saul. I mean, not fleeing from Saul, fleeing from Absalom. Yeah. He was fleeing Absalom, yeah. So, but yeah, that's when, but the significance of this is where the originally, like Michael said, when they first went to took over the promised land, they had to cross the Jordan. And we'll talk about that here in just a minute. But yeah, David crossed over the Jordan basically to flee Absalom. And of course, that's where the battle in the forest took place, where Absalom was defeated. So again, he has to cross the river back over on his way back to Jericho. And that's why they're talking about crossing this river here. But again, this is the original river that the Israelites had crossed on their way to the Promised Land after they'd wandered in the wilderness for 40 years. Question number 2. Who were the 2 priests who served David during the revolt of his son? We talked about those last week. You know, they had remained there in Jerusalem basically as spies, but also as the high priest. Zadok, his family continued to reign as the high priest up until about the time of Christ, a little bit before that. Whereas Abiathar, he sided with David's other son when the kingdom, when David was almost died, when David was ready to die, I should say, and his son Adonijah had declared himself king. Abiathar basically sided with him, and he was banished from Jerusalem. So he was right here you see where he's one of David's allies, but in the end he becomes, I hate to use the word enemy of David, but he is banished from Israel there, or from Jerusalem. Question number 3. What group of men did David rebuke for being slow to meet him and asking him to return as king? Elders of where? Judah, yeah. And what was significant about Judah? Who was David's? Yeah, his own tribe, yeah. And also Absalom, who was his tribe? Judah there also, yeah. So you can see that the problem here, you know, it's almost like there's a family feud here going on with the tribe of Judah, because when Absalom had remember we talked about a couple weeks ago, he went to Hebron to declare himself as king. And of course, that's where David had declared himself king some probably 30, 35 years earlier. So you had a lot of the people of the nation of Judah that was still supporting Absalom, even though he was dead. And they were a little bit slower to bring David back. So that's why David sent message to the 2 high priests and asked them, you know, am I not your own flesh and I'm not your own blood? Trying to convince them to win them over. But again, you know, we see this all the time in families. You know, families divide over certain things, and this is sort of like almost like a family feud there. But again, they had to decide who they wanted to be their king, and it only made sense in the end to go back to David. But again, they were a little bit slow, because at this point in time, the nation of Israel, when I say the Israel, the 10 northern tribes, they had already accepted David as their king. But the elders of Judah were, like I said, were basically dragging their feet on this about not bringing him back to Jerusalem at this time. Question number 4. Who had Absalom appointed as the head over his army, taking the place of Joab? Who? Amasa, yeah. I say Amasa, but Mesa, Amasa. Lafayette, you know, either way. But still, you know, he was the captain of Absalom's army, and he was sort of the equivalent of Joab being the captain of David's army. Probably, I would say, as far as a military leader, probably not as good as Joab, because we see, you know, that obviously Absalom had been defeated, of course, with God's help there too, that caused that. But it's interesting too that what relationship did Amasa have to King David? Is his nephew, just like, and whether it's his son's child or his daughter, I don't know. But again, same as Joab. Joab was one of his nephews. Amasa was one of his nephews also. You see there. And also too, we see in verse 13, it said, and say to Amasa, are you not my bone and my flesh? God do so to me, and me more also, if you are not the commander of my army before me continually in the place of Joab. So we see here he replaces him. And it's interesting too, a lot of times when people would come into power and stuff, and someone who had opposed him, what would they do to him? Kill him, yeah. You know, he was commander of a different army, but of Absalom's army, but he didn't do that. You know, he didn't kill him for opposing him. He, you know, basically gave him mercy. And you know, what do you think David was trying to do here when he did that? What's that? Yeah, get back to Jerusalem, but what was he trying to do with the people? You know, he had two divisions here. He'd had Amasa being in charge of Absalom's army. When he made him commander of his own army, what was he doing there? He was trying to unite them, yeah. And it's very interesting. You know, we don't really see that. You know, he's trying to build trust. He's trying to, you know, to show compromise. He's trying to bring them together. You know, we've got to keep in mind here, you know, the kingdom of Israel had been through a terrible war. It's a civil war. And there's a lot of division. You know, a lot of family, you know, they were all family. They were all children of Jacob. All the 12 tribes were. These were all family members. They were all Jewish. And here they are, you know, they've had this fracture. They're broken. And, you know, David's trying to figure out a way to bring them all back together. You know, not just to have Judah on his side, but also to have the 10 tribes there. And I was reading that too. I didn't realize this, but, you know, during the Civil War, you know, sort of the same thing happened here in the United States. You know, we had our own Civil War. You know, Abraham Lincoln, when he won the president in 1864, when he ran for president again, he switched over. He got rid of his vice president. He took Andrew Johnson, who was a governor of Tennessee. He took a Southern governor alongside. You know, can you imagine that nowadays? You know, going out and getting somebody that was. But he took a Southern governor and made him vice president, trying to unite the country there. I read too that John Adams, you know, Thomas Jefferson was from a different party. He chose him as his vice president back in the day, trying to keep a unified country, a united country. Now, do we see that today now? No. Country today, it's basically the rule of 270. You know, you get 270 electoral votes, you know, no matter where you get them at or how you get there to it. And that's sort of the way you feel like this country is nowadays, you know. But in the end, you know, David was pretty smart there. You know, he was trying to unite the country, to bring it back together, not to divide and to have division there. And so we see that there that you know, this is a pretty good strategy on David's part. You know, try to bring people together, and to, you know, make his kingdom, I should say, or Israel, you know, stronger than it was before. Any comments or questions there? Now, question 5. What was the historical importance of Gilgal, west of the Jordan, where David first met with the people of Judah? Yeah, that's what Mike was talking about a while ago. That's where they came into the Promised Land. The same route they crossed the Jordan River back earlier, you know, several hundred years earlier, and he was showing, you know, taking the same path, you might say, to the Promised Land. You know, and it said too, you know, that's where when Israel first crossed, when Joshua crossed the river there, that's where they first set up their camp there at Gilgal, and also too, Joshua built a monument there. They took the 12, you remember the story about taking the 12 stones out of the river and placing it there to show where the miraculous stopping of the river there to allow them to cross back. So that was where this all took place there at Gilgal. Okay. Question number 6. Who was the Benjaminite who David forgave, who had cursed the king when he had fled before Absalom? Yeah. And this is interesting. Get back up here. We didn't really cover this earlier, but back in 2 Samuel 16:5, it says, as King David came to Bahurim, a man came out of the village cursing them. It was Shimei, son of Gera, from the same clan as Saul's family. He threw stones at the king and the king's officers and all the mighty warriors who surrounded him. Get out of here, you murderer, you scoundrel, he shouted at David. The Lord is paying you back for all the bloodshed in Saul's clan. You stole his throne, and now that the Lord has given it to your son Absalom. At least you will take some of your own medicine, for you are a murderer. And then the next verse, which has, he said, what should we do with this dead dog Well, why should this dead dog curse my lord, the king? Abishai, son of Zeruiah, demanded. Let me go over and cut off his head. So that's Joab's brother. But still, we see here when he was leaving Jerusalem, he was fleeing, he went to this town, and this Shimei had cursed him, threw rocks at his army, told him, this is what you get for what you did to Saul. He was a Benjaminite. But the funny thing about it, the thing he says here too, he says the Lord is repaying you. But the difference here, the Lord, whose side was the Lord on? Whose side was the Lord on in the end? David, yeah, that's why David was victorious, because again, he didn't have probably the numbers to defeat Absalom, but he was on his side there. But we see here this gentleman, Shimei, comes down to meet him at the river as David's getting ready to cross back over the Jordan, back going toward Jerusalem. And he comes there basically to apologize because he realized probably what could happen to him. Be killed, yeah. He could be killed. David could come back and take revenge on him. But, it also talks about, too, he had 1,000 Benjaminites. I'm not for sure if they were actually with him. It sounds like they were, whether or not he brought them along as to show, hey, these people, you forgive me, these people follow you. If he's showing them that, hey, to let them witness what's happened. So you got 1,000 people witnesses the interaction between him and David. But either way, what did David do to him? What did he do to him in this day? Huh? Yeah. He forgave. He let him off the hook, so and that's it's a good story there, if that was the end of it. But you think, well, that's a good story on forgiveness, how we should forgive people. But if you look over 2 Kings, 1 Kings 2, chapter 8. 1 Kings chapter 2, verses 8 and 9. And David, he's on his deathbed here, okay? And he's talking to Solomon. And he's already given 2 or 3 different directions to him before we get to verse 8. But this is what he says about Shimei. He says, and remember Shimei, son of Gera, the man from Baharam in Benjamin. He cursed me with a terrible curse as I was fleeing to Mahanaim. When he came down to meet me at the Jordan River, I swore by the Lord that I would not kill him. But that oath does not make him innocent. You are a wise man. You will know how to arrange a bloody death for him. So again, he was forgiven there that day, but David, on his deathbed, made sure, what's that? He forgave, he didn't forget, yeah. So I guess there's a lesson in there too. We shouldn't hold grudges all of our life for people, but that was one of the things, the commands David gave in his life. This guy was saved this day, but again, in the end, David, got his deathbed revenge on him. So that was interesting. So any comments or questions? Okay. Question number 7. And this question, I don't think it says, who was a relative of Mephibosheth? I think it means of Saul, who came to David begging for forgiveness. I think the question answers the question, What's that? Yeah, he was the son of Jonathan, yeah. So I guess I don't know what they're asking for there, but yeah, this young man, Mephibosheth, and we're not going back and read this, but the story behind this is of course, we told the story about him, Saul, when Jonathan died, he asked David to watch over his household, and the only person left in his household was this Mephibosheth. He was lame, and he had this gentleman named Ziba was his servant. So when David was fleeing Jerusalem, Mephibosheth wanted to go and be with him, and he told him to take him supplies, and he would saddle him up a donkey or saddle him up something to ride to go there. But what Ziba did was just basically left him because he couldn't, he was lame. So he took the possessions. He goes to King David, and he says, "Here I am." David says, "Where's Mephibosheth at?" Because, and he's like, "Because you're a servant." He's like, "Well, he has went over to the other side. He's with Absalom now because he is the only heir to King Saul." So if something happens to you two guys, guess who's gonna be king from now on? So basically, he was plotting to become king. Now, that's not true, we see here, but that's what David was told. And David at that time said, okay, all that Mephibosheth has, those possessions are given to Ziba. So that's what took place before all this. So as he comes back to Jerusalem, or as he's coming back to Jerusalem, crossing the river there, Mephibosheth is there to say, hey, this is not true. And of course, David's a little bit short with him here. He doesn't really seem to want to listen to him a whole lot. And he comes to him and tells him the story. He said, hey, he said, he left me. He said, I'm lame. I couldn't go. I wanted to come to you. What condition was he in when he came to David? You read there. What did it say about him? Yeah. He hadn't kept. He hadn't bathed. He hadn't taken care of his feet. He hadn't taken care of anything. It showed that during that whole time David was gone, that he was in mourning because his king had left. So it showed that he was probably, if you take the two stories between Ziba and Mephibosheth, you're probably going to say his story is true because of the way that he did while the king was gone. And of course, David, like I said, he basically heard the story, said, I don't want to hear any more of this. And he gave him back, you and Ziba can split the land. He did give him back his whole, he gave all of his land to Ziba at first, all of Mephibosheth, but he only gave back half of it to him. So I'm not sure what that was all about, why he didn't do that. A lot of people talk about David making poor decisions as he gets older. We see this with Solomon. Solomon sort of had the same problem where the lady brought the baby in, and he said, well, cut it in two. And the real mom said, no, let her keep it, But Mephibosheth at the end here, what does he say? He said, let him have it all. I don't care because my king is back. You're safe, and that's all that matters. And you would have thought that David may have stepped in at this point and said, hey, you can have it all. This shows that you're the right one here. But instead, he's basically, that's good. I'm ready. He moves on from this. And so doesn't really go back and you would think do what's the right thing and give him all of his possessions back. But again, it didn't seem like it really mattered to him that much. Question number 8. What had David done for Mephibosheth? What's that? Save his life? Yeah, it took care of him, because again, when King Saul had died, King Saul and David had died, or not David, King Saul and Jonathan had died, this is the heir to the throne, you might say here. So in most instances, they went out and they would had him killed because he was a threat to David. But David didn't do that. David kept him, took him into his own home, and he ate at his table. And we see here too, we talked about earlier that we had the 10 northern tribes. The 2 southern tribes were Judah, which was David's own family, and also Benjamin. So you wonder sometimes maybe with the respect that he showed, I don't know if it has anything to do with it or not, but the way he treated him, the way he treated Saul is only surviving, I don't say only surviving relative, but the next in line to the throne with his condition, the way he treated him was not part of the reason why that they stayed with David and formed an alliance there later on. But but he did show kindness to him. And I'm sorry. Question number 8. Question number 9. It says, what distinguishing feature of Barzillai caused him to refuse the invitation of the king? And again, this is not in our reading today, first of all. He's an old man, yeah. I think that we read that later on down in this, what Brian read, it wasn't in there, but it said that, what did he say he couldn't, to Joy, yeah, he said, I couldn't taste the food, I can't hear the beautiful singing, in other words, I'm just too old to go. But he did say, he did say that he wanted to come down and cross over the river with him. So again, it probably shows how important it was for that crossing of the river, going back to Jerusalem. So he wanted to be there for that. But he did ask him to take someone with him, which may have been his son. I'm not for sure, but again, but there was someone there that he requested to go with King David that did and stayed there in Jerusalem with him. And question number 10 here. This is another question that was not in our reading today, or another answer. This was not our reading to answer this question. But who was the person from the tribe of Benjamin who led a rebellion against David after he returned to Jerusalem. Sheba, yeah. And if you look down, you know, in chapter 19, verse 40 there, let me read this real quick. So then the king crossed over to Gilgal, taking Kinham with him, all the troops of Judah, and half the troops of Israel escorted the king on his way. But all the men of Israel complained to the king. The men of Judah stole the king, and they didn't give us honor of helping take you, your household, and all your men across the Jordan. The men of Judah replied, the king is one of our own kinsmen. Why should this make you angry? We haven't eaten any of the king's food or received any special favors. But there are 10 tribes in Israel, the others replied, so we have 10 times as much right to the king as you do. What right do you have to treat us with such contempt? Weren't we the first to speak of bringing him back to be our king again? The argument continued back and forth, and the men of Judah spoke even more harshly than the men of Israel. And in chapter 20 it says, there happened to be a troublemaker there named Sheba, son of Bachri, a man from the tribe of Benjamin. Sheba blew a ram's horn and began to chant, down with the dynasty of David. We have no interest in the son of Jesse. Come on, you men of Israel, back to your homes. So all the men of Israel deserted David and followed Sheba, son of Bachri, but the men of Judah stayed with their king and escorted him from the Jordan to Jerusalem. So we see here, this Sheba, see how fractured the nation of Israel is here, right here, because basically all he did was blew a trumpet and declared himself, we have no part of this. And what happened? All the 10 tribes took off. It said, it backed up there. It said half of the 10 tribes went across the river with him, but it said after he blew the horn, basically they all deserted him. They just left, Judah there with David to go back to Jerusalem. It's interesting too. When they're fighting back and forth here, first of all, they said that the men of Israel complained to the king. The men of Judah stole the king, and you didn't give us honor of helping take you and your household and all your men across the Jordan. What did David say when they asked him this? What was his response? That was a trick question. He didn't say anything. David did nothing. It's just almost like he did with his children. When Absalom had killed Amnon. When Amnon had done what he had done to Tamar, all the things he had done, he had never done anything. You think David, he had an opportunity here maybe to bring because we know moving forward from here that again Israel, or the Israel as we know it, the 12 tribes of Israel are pretty much, when we talk, moving forward in the scriptures here, when they talk about Israel, they're probably talking about the 10 northern tribes. When they talk about, and they'll talk about the southern or Judah and Benjamin by themselves. But David had an opportunity here, if you read this, probably to maybe quieten all this. We see now the days in our nation, something happens. What happens, something bad happens in our nation. That night on television, you usually have the president comes on. He'll come on, try to bring the nation together, say this has happened, this is a bad thing. And this is something that you think David had an opportunity here to go out and say, hey, let's all be one. Let's all be united. But David sat there and let the tribes fight back and forth. And who finally won the argument? Basically it says Judah did. And how did they win? They just got louder. Yeah. So the winner, David sat there and he was quiet the whole time. He never tried to intercede. David never tried to be the leader that he should have been here. Instead, he sat there and let them argue back and forth. And then we see the division that happens here afterwards. And so the kingdom splits right here. Of course, we see at the end of this, David does send his men down. We're not going to talk about it. We don't read about this. But David, he went to Jerusalem. He told Amasa, of course, he's the leader of his army now. He tells him to go and to quiet down Sheba because he says, but he was taking his time with it. So he gets Abishai, which is Joab's brother, says, go and take this guy out of here because he's going to be more of a threat than Absalom is. So again, this is the reading we didn't get into today, but, so Joab and Abishai meet up with Amasa, which was, again, their cousin, their first cousin. They're all together there, and when Joab, of course, Amasa had, this is also confusing here, but Amasa had taken Joab's place. So when he goes to meet him, he gives him a hug with one arm, and he takes his dagger with his other arm and kills him right there on the spot, you know. So, and again, that's, if you read back here a while ago, you know, that's one of the reasons at the end of his life, when David dies, another one of his deathbed wishes is for Joab to be killed, because what he had done here to Amasa, and also to one of King Saul's commanders too there. But again, in the end, they quietened down this rebellion, and this guy here, Sheba, is killed, and everything sort of goes back to as normal as it can be. So, any questions or comments to this point? Okay. Discussions. Of course, a lot of these we discussed as we're going through there, but after the death of Absalom, there was a dispute among the tribes of Israel. Why was there a dispute amongst I can't speak now. Why was there a dispute amongst the tribes of Israel about David's return to the kingship? Yeah, he fled, yeah. And, you know, I guess some of them probably thought if he was king, he should have stayed there and defended the city. But again, it just starts to show that, you know, there is a big division there amongst the Israel nation. And again, as we move forward, we'll see how this plays out. But again, one of the last thing we want to talk about here real quick, you know, you did see David, though. He tried to be, you might say a little politician here. He tried to, you know, he didn't kill the people. He didn't try to rule with an iron fist. He tried to, you know, show compromise. He tried to bring everybody together, and it worked for a small time. Of course, we'll see King Solomon here later on, but then later on we'll see David's grandson, Rehoboam, and he ruled totally different. You know, he ruled with an iron fist. And what happened in that situation? It went the wrong way, didn't it? That's when they finally split, but you know. So anyway, we'll get to that in a few weeks, but we'll see y'all next week.